Hello and welcome to another entry in our feedback webinar series. The title of this one is Into the Microsoft Dataverse, and this is our first webinar for January 2021. So, a little bit of a disclaimer just to begin with. This is a re-recording of the webinar. Just because we had a technical issue with the original recording. Basically, the mouse cursor was not moving across the screen when we were recording. So although the people who watched the webinar live were watching the demonstrations as expected, when we came to produce the content afterwards, the mouse cursor was just stationary for the whole demonstration, and we thought we can't have that out on YouTube. So we're re-recording the session again. The advantages of that is that I can run through the session a little quicker, a little bit more refined, some more up-to-date information, and hopefully I can also incorporate my webcam into the session as well, just for a little overlay. So just as an overview of what we're going to cover, I'm going to cut this webinar down a little bit to focus on introducing the Microsoft Dataverse and what it offers you, and we'll keep that to hopefully about 40 minutes or less. So a little bit about myself. My name's Chris. I normally, alongside my colleagues, deliver the feedback webinar series. Just a little bit about myself. You can find me on LinkedIn if you have any questions about what you see on the webinar today. My role at Combined Knowledge is I am a technical content and training lead manager. So that basically means I lead the training team at Combined Knowledge, and make sure they're up to date with all the skills they need to teach you all of the magical things that happen in Microsoft 365. And as a technical content manager, I also make sure that the content that we release is of the highest standard. I've worked with Microsoft as a technical editor on their step-by-step book series, and I also speak on behalf of Microsoft and Combined Knowledge at various community events across the United Kingdom. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, and I've also very recently acquired the Power Platform App Maker Associate Award, which again qualifies my amazing interest in the Power Platform. So let's just jump into this session and talk about what is the Dataverse. So effectively, I love the naming that Microsoft has used. It's very cool, but the first thing that I thought of when I heard Dataverse was the Into the Spider-Verse, which is a Sony film about Spider-Man that was released a year or so ago. Fun to watch, but unfortunately it's got nothing to do with Microsoft Dataverse. In fact, Microsoft Dataverse isn't actually new. It was formerly called the Common Data Service. Last year in 2020, Microsoft moved from calling it the Common Data Service and then called it Data Flex for about a month, and then decided no, they're not going to call it Data Flex, they're going to call it Dataverse. So effectively, the Common Data Service is Microsoft Dataverse. But what is effectively the Common Data Service? Well, its roots are very old. The Common Data Service was originally the database that sat behind the old CRM system that you might use on premises. So when you're interacting with Microsoft CRM, the Customer Relationship Management tool, is this a database that lurked in the background that held all of the customer information, and that evolved and eventually became part of Microsoft Dynamics 365, which was available online. And then of course then you started to see the Common Data Service emerge from that, giving us the ability for us to design a database directly in Microsoft 365. Now let's say that you're not that interested in databases, you don't really touch them, or maybe you are, but effectively what Microsoft did here is they gave us the opportunity to build a database through a web browser. We don't need any additional software. We can literally open a web browser, create tables, create relationships and forms and views and rules, all in the web browser, making setup of information architecture very easy. So that's a great advantage to us, but what makes Dataverse even better is how Microsoft have engineered the Power Platform to leverage the Dataverse so easily, because all of that data exists in those tables. You can connect your Power Apps to it, your flows can go into it and retrieve information, pass it to a chatbot, your Power BI can query the information and potentially present that information back as reports and dashboards. It's all very exciting what Power Platform and Dataverse bring for you. Now, There are two versions of Microsoft Dataverse, and what we're going to clarify in this webinar is the two versions and what they're for, what their purposes are, and effectively how you can consume and leverage them. These are the two versions. So we've got Microsoft Dataverse and Microsoft Dataverse for Teams. So Microsoft Dataverse is the kind of the full fat version of the platform. So effectively, it's the full database system, which is scalable, highly available. But if you're designing a database using Microsoft Dataverse, one of the things that you need to be aware of is the cost. Effectively, when it comes to things like Power Apps and Power Automate, if you want to connect to your Dataverse database and use those tables, then it's going to be a cost to you. Effectively, when it comes to Power Apps and Power Automate, we have what we call premium connections. Connecting your workflows and apps to Dataverse is a premium connection, and that means that for each user who wants to run your flow or use your app, they'll require a premium license to do so, which could be a cost per user, per app, per month in regards to something like Power Apps. So when it comes to kind of leveraging Microsoft Dataverse, we get the most flexibility from the Dataverse system, but there is a cost associated to connecting some of the Power Platform up with Microsoft Dataverse. If we have a look at Microsoft Dataverse for Teams, this is a sort of smaller, more compact version of Microsoft Dataverse, but it is free. It's costed into the license that you associate with a user that's using Teams already. So as long as they're licensed to use Microsoft Teams, they can use Microsoft Dataverse for Teams. What it does is it creates a database that is kind of locked into an environment within your team. So your team, each, if you're using Microsoft Dataverse, will have their own environments, and within there you can start to build your Microsoft Dataverse database in the form of tables. And it means that when you've built those tables for your team, you can then connect apps and flows and build chatbots that potentially could leverage that database. That's really exciting, but what it would probably suggest to you is that what you're building is only really accessible to your team. Well, that's not actually true at this moment in time, because Microsoft have very recently released further news about what they call broad distribution apps. So before this announcement, when we were thinking about building solutions in Microsoft Dataverse for Teams, it felt like you were just building stuff for one team, the team that you're currently in. However, you can actually use broad distribution apps to basically share your apps and your tables potentially with another security group, whether it's an Azure security group or a Microsoft 365 security group. But you can share your apps and your tables with another audience. So if you're maybe an IT department and you are building apps for other areas of the business to use, you could control all of the assets within your IT support team, but then make them broad distribution apps so that they're facing other teams as well. So that's quite exciting. The other thing is we must understand that with Microsoft Dataverse for Teams, the whole thing is designed around your team security as well. So if you're building apps and chatbots and workflows using Microsoft Dataverse for Teams, anyone who's an owner of the Microsoft team has control of those assets as well. And anyone who's a member of your team will have access to the assets that you create. So it uses your team's security to govern who can manage the solutions that you build and who can actually consume them. Also, one thing that's worth noting is whatever you build in Microsoft Dataverse for Teams must be accessed from within Microsoft Teams. So if you build a solution like an app, it can only be accessed from within Microsoft Teams. Now, the good news is that can be the web version of Teams, it can be the desktop application version of Teams, it could even be the mobile version of Microsoft Teams as well. So with that respect, it's highly accessible, But if you are used to using things like Power Apps, the full studio that is available in Microsoft 365, you may know that you can publish apps that will appear on your mobile phone. So you can get the Power Apps mobile app on your mobile phone and even pin the app to your home screen. Well, unfortunately, what you build in Microsoft Dataverse for Teams won't really appear in Power Apps, or the web client version of Power Virtual Agents, or the web version of Power Automate. All of the solutions you build are only really accessible within Microsoft Teams. So effectively, it means that we've got, for those who own a Microsoft team, a little package that we can leverage to build services and solutions for a very local audience. But again, we've now got two versions of Microsoft Teams that we're talking about. So let's go back to Microsoft Dataverse, the full fat version of that platform. So effectively, what does Microsoft Dataverse get that's an advantage over, for say, Microsoft Dataverse for Teams? Well, effectively, one of the things that we get is what we call mobile offline. So mobile offline is a Microsoft Dataverse feature that you won't find in Microsoft Dataverse for Teams, and it gives us this luxury of being able to have apps that can operate offline. I've often been asked if I can design or help people design solutions that can work offline. And prior to this feature, it was quite tricky, but not impossible, to get your apps to work offline. However, with this mobile offline functionality, it's made a lot simpler. For those who use Power BI, you may also be aware of things like paginated reports. Paginated reports are also available in the full Microsoft Dataverse option. You've also got API access for developers who would like to expose functionality in Microsoft Dataverse in their own creations. And they've also got a variety of plugins that you can use with Microsoft Dataverse as well. If you're looking at the size of your tables in Microsoft Dataverse, the maximum size for a table is 4 terabytes. However, if you're using Microsoft Dataverse for Teams, this is much smaller. So you're limited in Microsoft Dataverse for Teams. You're allowed 1 million rows of data or up to 2 gigabytes of data. Now, although that sounds like a limitation, typically the solutions that you might build in Microsoft Dataverse for Teams are not enterprise level. They might be niche tools that you need in your department. So 2 gigabytes of data, if you're thinking about text, is not actually going to, that's actually going to give you quite a lot of space. And 1 million rows is a lot of data. I mean, if you've worked with any of the data sources with Power Apps, you'll know that there's quite often delegation issues or limitations in the data source itself. So 1 million rows is actually very generous. Another thing that Microsoft Dataverse offers us, depending on the number of environments that you have, you actually are not really very limited to the amount of databases that you can have, apart from the fact that with an environment in Microsoft 365, you're only allowed one database per environment. The similar limitation is that you're only allowed one database per team in Microsoft Dataverse for Teams. So you're limited by these environments that are actually created for either your teams or either environments that are created by your administrators. There's also in Microsoft Dataverse more diverse security roles, and often it offers more integration, such as the ability to connect to Azure Data Lake, Events Hubs, Service Bus, and also utilize webhooks and SQL Server Management Studio. So you can see that there's more functionality in Microsoft Dataverse. If you were a Power Platform user, if someone had created tables in Microsoft Dataverse and relationships, how would you be able to leverage that data model within the Power Platform? Well, effectively, one of the ways that you could leverage it is with Power Apps. With Power Apps, you can connect to your tables. Now, you'll notice here some of the legacy terminology, which I'll highlight in a moment. You can see that it's referred to as the Common Data Service, and the entities which are now called tables are the current reference. Hopefully, this will update. But what Power Apps gives us the opportunity to do is build apps that can leverage that data. So we could create forms that allow us to create new records or edit existing records or delete records. So if you wanted people to interact with your data in your tables, you could use Power Apps to achieve that. You could also display data that are in your tables as well in things like gallery controls. So Power Apps is very much attuned to these kind of data sources. In addition to that, Power Automate also has the ability to connect to what is currently listed as the Common Data Service, which in effect is Microsoft Dataverse. You'll notice a collection of actions that we could potentially use here. Now, just before we move on to Power Virtual Agents, can I just point out that there's a value called Premium here. So this is where I mentioned earlier that if you create a Power App or a Power Automate flow that connects to Microsoft Dataverse, there can be a cost, well, there will be a cost associated with that, and that's because connecting to Microsoft Dataverse requires you to use this premium connector. So in effect, there is that cost of designing flows and apps that connect to Microsoft Dataverse. So that's what that premium badge is all about. In regards to Power Virtual Agents, this is the kind of the anomaly. Typically, Power Virtual Agents, when you're designing topics of conversation for a chatbot, will not necessarily allow you to directly connect to your Dataverse tables. But because Power Virtual Agents can call flows, and flows can do that interrogation for you, effectively you can potentially get a flow to retrieve information from your tables and bring it back to the bot if necessary. So there is the opportunity to do that. There's also a bit of terminology conflict in regards to things like the Common Data Service, which is the former name of Dataverse, and entities, which exists in Power Virtual Agents. Let me explain. So you'll notice it says entities here, and it says entities over here. Entities in Power Virtual Agents allows us to create synonyms for terminology that we might use in our chatbot. So I say something like parking, someone might say the synonym for parking could be car lot or parking area or something like that. So entities in Power Virtual Agents is not actually the same as entities over in Common Data Service, and which is why Microsoft have renamed entities in the Common Data Service to become tables in Microsoft Dataverse. So that should mean that when Power Automate and Power Apps update, hopefully these references to entities will be removed and replaced with tables, meaning that the term entity is a little bit more unique in Power Virtual Agents. So just a bit of terminology conflict there. If you wanted to use Power BI with the Microsoft Dataverse, then you'll notice here that this is the only product that's actually kind of referenced Microsoft Dataverse for so far. So hopefully the others will catch up. But you'll see that it's got the Common Data Service legacy here, and then it shows Dataverse. So if you wanted to report on the information that's housed within your tables in Microsoft Dataverse, Power BI can do that for you. And that is Power BI Desktop, not Power BI Web. So that's what the Dataverse offers us in regards to integration with the Power Platform. So with our data housed around that hub of information, Power Platform can reach into it and work with us. Just a little note at the bottom of the slide here that I've just introduced just to talk about that terminology difference for the Common Data Service evolving to Dataverse and things like entities and fields, which became renamed as tables and columns. Okay, so those are the areas that Microsoft Dataverse can be exploited by Power Platform, but what you're probably more interested in is the free Microsoft Dataverse for Teams. It gives us the opportunity to actually design chatbots that can be used for free in Microsoft Teams. We can build apps that can connect to our tables in Dataverse for Teams. We can even build flows that retrieve information from Microsoft Dataverse for Teams tables. So it's very exciting to kind of see a package of free tools to kind of introduce us to the Power Platform in a free and safe manner. And then if you decide that you want to use any of the premium features for Dataverse or the Power Platform, they've got that liberty to escalate if you need to. At this moment in time, it's worth mentioning that Microsoft will be introducing in the future an opportunity to upgrade a Microsoft for Teams Dataverse database to a normal Microsoft Dataverse database. It's not available at this point in time in January 2021, but they do say it is coming. So I want to show you a little bit about how to use Microsoft Dataverse for Teams. There's a lot that is actually quite subtle that you need to know about. So let's get started. So I'm just going to navigate over to Microsoft Teams, and we're going to have a quick look around. So just to begin with, we've got the Microsoft Teams tab selected on the left-hand side of the screen. I've created this team called Employee Onboarding. Now, just a little tip for you. If you want to go away after this session and have a little bit of a practice using Microsoft Dataverse for Teams, as long as you're allowed to create teams, you could always create a team and build some test solutions. When you're happy, you could just delete the team, and it will actually delete the Dataverse environment and also all of the assets you create. So it's quite self-contained. So when you delete the team, you get rid of everything else. It's really, really nice to be able to perhaps create a proof of concept and show it off to your colleagues and then decide whether or not these features will work for you. So how do you access Dataverse for Teams? Well, it's actually predominantly done through the Power Apps app that you can pin to Microsoft Teams. If you haven't used this, click on the ellipsis on the left side of the screen. Now, I've used Power Apps before, but if you can't see Power Apps, you can search for it and then add it as an app to your Microsoft Teams experience. Once you've added it as an app, you can then select it or even perhaps pin it to the left-hand navigation. Okay, so once we've gone over to the Power Apps app, we've then got the opportunity to then have a look at building an environment. So no team starts with an environment which houses your tables for Microsoft Dataverse for Teams, and also any apps, chatbots, or flows that you build as part of that package. You have to build it. Now, how you build it could be up to you. There's two ways of building an environment. You can either start by creating an app, and what that will do is it will generate the environment for you. Or you could start by effectively adding a sample app to your Microsoft team. So just as a quick highlight of that, if I just scroll down briefly, you'll notice that there are some recent apps that I've worked on in the Home tab, and there's also some apps that you can add that are pre-built. So if you wanted, for example, an inspection app or an issue reporting app or an employee ideas app, you can simply select this app to see a preview of it and then add it to your team. And that will create the Microsoft Dataverse for Teams environment within your team. Or if you choose to maybe choose new app just at the top, it will ask you to name your app and then the app will load up. Once the environment has been created, which can take a little bit longer than normal, when the app loads, you'll have the opportunity to create a table within your environment. Now, it's a little bit odd to say, but the interface that you're offered to build the table within your app, for example, if I click new app, this might take a little bit of time. I'm going to select my team. So I'm going to pin this to our employee onboarding team. And just give that a few seconds. So if you don't have a environment yet, this will prep it for you. And then typically what will happen is it will ask you if you want to create any tables within Microsoft Dataverse for Teams. So you can choose to create tables, or you could effectively, if you've already got tables built in your environment, select them. So I'm going to call this reviews and click save. So can you see on the left-hand side of the screen that it says create a new table? That just gives me the opportunity to build a new table within my current environment for this team. However, one of the other things that you could possibly do is connect to any tables that you've already created. So in this case, I've already created some tables. So I could connect to, for example, my staff members table. So staff members has now been added as a data source within my app, and then I can start to play around with the app itself. So I notice that some of these controls have already connected to my staff members table, which is really cool. One of the things I really like about Power Apps is there's a lot to learn about it, but one thing that Microsoft have introduced is when you create new screens in this version of Power Apps, which is more tailored for Microsoft Teams, you get responsive design screens. So if you use this app on a mobile device, the screen would naturally collapse down if you're using the Microsoft Teams mobile app and then chose to use this app directly from your Microsoft Teams. So it's got this responsive design that's absolutely excellent. So one of the ways, as we mentioned earlier, that you can build tables is to use this bar on the left-hand side of the screen to potentially create a table. Alternatively, what I like to do sometimes, I'm just going to save this app, is I go to Build, and then one of the things that you'll see here is once it's loaded, this is the only team that I have available with an environment at the moment. This is giving me the option to either build a chatbot or an app. And we can see here that this is showing a content that I've built for this team. So we've got things like tables, apps, like the one that I've just created, and also a flow. And then if I click on this tab over here, it will show me any apps that I've installed. So this tends to be the apps that are the templates that we discussed earlier. So they go into a slightly different area if you used one of the template apps to generate your environment. However, any assets that your teams have built will also appear here. Now, one of the things I wanted to quickly show you is if you wanted to work with any of your tables or create a new table, there isn't the option to create a table from this drop down, but this is actually a smaller menu. If you go to the See All button just at the bottom left of this interface, what you'll notice is that there's a bigger and better interface for you to use. And if you have a look at the top of the screen just here in the ribbon, you'll notice that you've got the opportunity to create tables. So if you wanted to create tables and have more of a full screen interface for doing it rather than doing it in the Power Apps canvas designer, you could effectively go to add a new table here, or if you have a table, you could just select it. And then here you've got the opportunity to change your table settings, add new columns, add data to your table. So this is some of the data that we have in this this department records table. And then you can also create relationships with other tables by using lookup columns. So if you go to add a column and add a lookup column, you can actually pull across a value from another table, another column, and then that will form a relationship between your data tables. So it's all quite easy to use directly from within Microsoft Dataverse for Teams, which is predominantly accessed through the Power Apps app. So just in this summary, let's just go back to all of our assets on the left. We explained that to get this environment set up, you need to add an app to your team. That could be a blank app, or it could be one of the templates that we mentioned earlier. Once the environment's ready, you could either create a new table or tables for your environment directly through Power Apps in the Canvas designer, but I would actually recommend to perhaps go to the Build tab in the Power Apps app, then select your team, and then click on See All just down here. And that gives you the opportunity to create a new table here, and you've just got a bigger interface for doing that. Now, one of the other things that's quite powerful about Microsoft Dataverse for Teams are the bots that you can build to use directly in your team as well. So over here we've got chatbots, and we could potentially create a new chatbot directly from this interface. Now, I'm not going to create a chatbot from here. I'm actually going to open up a chatbot that I built earlier just to kind of explain to you the really cool features that are available in Microsoft Power Virtual Agents, which is the tool that we use to build chatbots. So if you wanted to build a new chatbot, you can click on this drop down and choose chatbot, and that will open up the Power Virtual Agents app in Microsoft Teams. If you haven't used that before, it might ask you to add the app before it loads. I've used it before, so it's just taken me directly in. And then you'd give your bot a name and then choose the language for your bot. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to come back out again. I'm going to open one of the bots that I've designed exclusively for this demo. So I'm going to just choose edit here. So on the previous webinar that we ran, I wanted to kind of give you a clearer understanding of how Power Virtual Agents works in the context of Microsoft Teams. So effectively, when it comes to these bots that you're designing. A chatbot is basically a method of allowing someone to have a conversation with a bot, which can automate a script of responses based on recognizing certain keywords within the bot itself. And one of the things that is really exciting about that is that in general, that's absolutely free. So if you design a bot and then start to use it within Microsoft Teams, as long as it's in Teams using this Power Virtual Agents for Teams app, it's free to use. So that's quite exciting for people who want to create these experiences in Microsoft Teams where we can help people immediately with the right information. Now, there is a premium version of Power Virtual Agents that may require a subscription setup, but as long as you avoid certain things, you should be okay. So one of the things that we would want to avoid is effectively, if I go to the channels section here, you'll notice that Microsoft Teams is highlighted here, but everything else has this little diamond. So if you wanted to publish a chatbot to a custom website or to Facebook or to Slack, you'd then need to have that premium subscription. If you wanted your app to leverage what we call skills, you might have an Alexa that has skills. Skills are a way of adding more functionality to your bot. So that might give you something like the ability to book an appointment or send a confirmation email or manage tasks. You've got that luxury of adding those skills directly to your bot. But again, that's premium, so that will require that additional subscription as well. Another thing that is quite important as well is that when we're building our bots, we can call Power Automate flows. And as long as the flows that you call don't have any premium actions inside them, then again, you won't need a premium subscription for Power Virtual Agent to run that flow. There is more information about that on Microsoft's website. So if you search for Power Virtual Agents licensing or pricing, you should be able to find information about the premium side of things and what the limitations are. But mostly, if you avoid those things, it should be free. So just a quick overview. Just on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got our home screen for just getting started with Power Virtual Agents. You also have your topics. So your topics are basically a conversation. So I've got a topic here called office questions, which I'll open up shortly. And that's just basically any questions about our office, like where's my local fire escape route, or who's my fire marshal, or where can I park? Those kind of questions are bundled into the office questions topics. And you can have multiple topics for your bots. So those are just different conversations that your bots can have with your staff. There are also what we call entities. So entities are quite important. I'm just going to close this test bot panel here. So entities give us the opportunity to basically, if I go to head office, define terms or items. So we've got a term called parking, fire safety, breakout rooms, and opening hours. And what I've done is I've just provided synonyms for those particular phrases. This helps build the intelligence of our bot. If someone said, I have a blue badge, they're probably talking about wanting to park. So we could get our bot to skip from the start of the conversation all the way over to the part of the conversation that talks about parking. This is a technology called slot filling, and it's a really useful feature that you can use if you get your entities set up when building your bots. We've also got options such as analytics to publish our bot and some of the management options for the icon of the bot and other settings as well. So there's quite a bit on the left here, but what I want to do is I want to go back to our topics and I want to show you what a topic looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this in the authoring canvas. The authoring canvas will show you what the flow of conversation looks like. So you'll notice here we've got our trigger phrases, where can I eat lunch, what time does the office open. So these are the phrases that will trigger this particular topic. But because I created an entity called head office earlier, I could actually ask questions like, thank you for your question, I'll be happy to assist you. Regarding our head office, what is your query related to? So they might say something like, I want head office information, which starts this topic, which then asks them, did they need information on parking, fire safety, breakout rooms, or opening hours? But because I've got my entity for our office information, sorry, it's head office, that one, we could actually turn the items in the head office entity into the choices. The exciting thing about that is that that means that if we start the conversation and use the keyword parking or any of those synonyms, it should jump us directly to that part of the conversation. Just to prove the slot filling works, if I choose test bot and search for, well, let's say, where can I park? Question mark. Watch what happens on the right. So it should hopefully start our bot and take us directly to how long are you planning on staying? And if we just zoom out a little bit there, we can see that it's actually jumped quite far through the conversation by using that slot filling, which is primarily what I use that entity for doing, just to help someone have a more natural conversation. Rather than it saying, what can I help you with? Do you want help with parking? Even though they've already stated that they want help with parking, it can help us jump in. And what I've done is I've asked another question to say whether it's less or more than 2 hours that they're staying. Maybe it's more than 2 hours that I'm planning on staying. And you'll notice that this will continue the conversation. So it says for parking for longer than 2 hours, you can go to Queen Street or Victoria Road, and then it's end the conversation there. Did that answer your question? We could click no, and it could take us to a different topic. Or we could click yes and say, yep, absolutely perfect. 5 stars. So I'm just going to reset that chat and just close that panel. Once you're ready, you choose to publish your bot. So your bot normally publishes to just colleagues in your team in Microsoft Teams because you associate your chatbot with a team. But what you could also do is you go to Manage and Security. Before you publish your bot, or maybe after if you're republishing, you can go to Access and change it to your entire organization, but it's normally just your team by default. When you've published your bot, what typically happens, if we go back to the Publish menu, is you can then choose to share your bot. And then that means that if someone wanted to add your bot, it would appear in this ellipsis. If you go to More Apps, there's a category of apps called Built for, and then Your Company, and then it should show your bot here. And what people could do is they could effectively select the bot and add it. It will appear as an app in their left navigation, and if they love your bot, they can right-click and pin or unpin. The only people who would be able to see that bot are either your team or everyone in the organization based on the security setting that we talked about earlier. That's in a nutshell is bots. Hopefully you like that. There is one last component of Microsoft Dataverse for Teams, and that is Power Automate. Power Automate gives us the opportunity to build workflows, which are automated business processes. They weave a tapestry of tasks between lots of different line of business systems. So if you wanted your bot to go to Microsoft Dataverse and query data out of your table, you'd actually need to call a workflow as part of your bot to then do that for you. Now, one of the common things that people make a mistake with is if they want to use Power Automate to work with their Dataverse tables in Microsoft Teams, what they often do is they go straight to the Power Automate app. This is actually a mistake because what effectively you're doing here is you're just building a workflow, and although it can interact with your teams or other services, it's not actually a workflow that's part of your environment. It's just a general workflow. If you navigate to Power Automate in the app launcher in Microsoft 365, you'll be able to see your workflow up there. If you want to build a workflow that leverages your tables in Microsoft Dataverse for Teams, you can't use the Power Automate app. You actually use the Power Apps app to do it. And I know that sounds a bit bizarre, but let me prove it to you. If we go back to the Power Apps app, just let that load. By the way, just a quick tip for you. If this loading screen keeps spinning, navigate away to something else. Like if you're using the web version of Microsoft Teams, just use the app launcher and navigate to OneDrive or something like that. Basically, it might lock up. So if you navigate away and come back, it's normally okay. You could try refreshing your page. So you could press like the F5 key or something like that to see if that helps. I've been very lucky in this webinar, but the previous time that I ran this webinar, we had it lock up on about 3 occasions. So it's certainly behaving a lot better. I do think it's when the environment is first set up. I think it's a bit less stable, but I think it does settle in about a day later. Anyway, how to build a workflow. Go to your Build tab, and then you'll notice again that we only get the option for chatbots, which launches the Power Virtual Agents app for Teams. and then a normal app. If we go to see all just at the bottom down here, you've then got the opportunity to click new, and then you should have the opportunity to choose a cloud flow. So we'll just give that a few seconds to load. And there's the option for cloud flow. So you could have an automated flow that triggers based on an event, an instant flow that triggers based on a button click, or a scheduled flow that will wait for a certain frequency or interval and then run the workflow, or run the workflow multiple times. So if I wanted to build an automated workflow, because we're building it as part of this environment, it will actually allow me to access the Microsoft Dataverse tables within this environment. So we're going to choose automated. And it's going to ask me for a trigger. I'm just going to select this as a trigger. That's fine. Give the flow a name, review, staff record, and then choose the option create. So I'm just going to delete this trigger for a second. The trigger is how your business process will start. And one of the cool things is that I can actually trigger my workflow based on a bot. So I could say from Power Virtual Agents, our workflow will start. So we could even retrieve information from the conversation and then pull that into the workflow by using these input fields. So I might want to know the staff name, person using the bot, and we could perhaps maybe fill that out later with a variable from the actual bot. We could then add a new step, and perhaps we want to leverage our beautiful Dataverse for Teams. We would select, at the moment, you would select Common Data Service Current Environment. Now, this would normally be listed as a premium connector, but in the context of what we've done here, we've used Power Apps to build this flow as part of Microsoft Dataverse for Teams. It's actually free to use in that context. So even though it's listed as premium, you can use it for free as long as you built it by going to Power Apps, going to Build tab, then selecting your team, clicking See All, and then creating a new workflow through Power Apps rather than Power Automate. So it is free in this context. What we could do is we could get, create a new row. We could get row, so we could do like a query, specify the table. So we could get our staff members table. Should probably type it. It'll probably be a bit faster, but we'll scroll through. I'm committed to scrolling now. So if we go to staff members, there we are. And then we can specify the item ID. We could actually use the information directly from the variable earlier that we'll pass through it. And then we could potentially start to create information. So if we're getting a row, we'll need to know a little bit about that. We could also pass information back to Power Virtual Agents as well. So if you go back to Power Virtual Agents, it has an action to return a value back to Power Virtual Agents. So you might retrieve information from the get row command, and then you want to pass the information, maybe holiday allowance or something like that, back to the bot and say you've got this many days left. So what's the most important thing here? Although it can be tricky, we need to actually avoid the Power Automate app in Microsoft Teams because it will just create a general workflow. If you want a workflow that's actually part of your Microsoft Dataverse for Teams experience and can access your tables, you need to go into the Build tab, See All, and then build your workflow directly from this menu here. Otherwise, if you do it the other way, it will show you tables, but it won't show you your bespoke tables that you've created in your environment. And that is basically what I would like to kind of get across to you in regards to Microsoft Dataverse for Teams. So where to get started? One thing I'd recommend doing is perhaps maybe going into Microsoft Teams, and if possible, don't slap a Dataverse for Teams directly onto a really popular team that you're already using. If you're just practicing, request a new team or create a new team depending on your organization's governance. Then go to the Power Apps app, maybe you'll want to pin it to your Microsoft Teams and then add an app directly to your Microsoft team. This will provision your environment and give you the option to build tables, apps that connect to the tables, flows that can connect to your tables, and bots that could call the workflows that connect to your tables. That is effectively the mixture that is Microsoft Dataverse for Teams and the Power Platform elements that can blend in with it. Okay, just as a little follow-up to the end of this webinar, thank you so much for watching. If you are interested in learning more about Microsoft Dataverse for Teams at Combined Knowledge, we have a one-day course that's nearly finished that will be releasing sometime in February 2021, so not too long away at all. Have a look at our website and keep an eye out for that course. If you're interested in attending it, we give you a general introduction to Microsoft Dataverse for Teams, followed by a more comprehensive look at setting up, managing and securing tables, creating apps, and there's a lot that you can learn about creating apps in Microsoft Power Apps. We'll talk about designing chatbots, so you'll learn a little bit more about how to design your chatbots with the various nodes and what you can do and engage with your users. And then finally, we'll also talk about using Power Automate to weave it all together to pass information between these various systems. So hopefully that sounds interesting to you. And like I said, keep an eye on our website for any of our upcoming courses. So thank you very much. Hopefully you've enjoyed our feedback webinar and you found it interesting. Don't forget to stay tuned to our newsletter or to our website for further information on the feedback webinars that will be happening in the near future. Until then, stay safe and we'll see you again soon.